Okay, thank you. Sure. Thank you so much. So, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Novia Rianti as a Master of Applied Economics student of University Pajajaran. Will be your moderator or host in today's public class. So first, I think I would say thank you for everyone who joined this class directly in this room, or even for those of you participant of the Zoom. I would say really thank you so much. And now I think I'm going to introduce our speaker or our lecturer first, which is he's already with us in the beginning. He is Dr. Frank Thorn. He is an associate professor at the Radboud University in the Netherlands. And I heard that he has specialization in the international economics. Right. Okay. So in today's main topic, we are going to talking and discuss. We are going to discuss about political deforestation cycles. So without any further ado, let's start our class. And for Dr. Franklin, the class is yours.
Okay, with this, okay, I can hear something. So it seems to be better, yeah? Okay. So can somebody in the online audience just confirm that you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, let's hope that this applies to everybody. So thank you very much for having me. And this is, of course, my special thanks to Ahmad, who has facilitated all this, made it possible that I come here. I actually wanted to stay here for a few days, but I have a limitation at the end because I've got to be at a wedding on a Saturday in Duri on Sumatra. So I have to leave tomorrow, unfortunately. And since you wanted to have your public holiday yesterday and the day before, I didn't want to interfere. Yeah? So you were celebrating and the university was closed. So we're limited to one day, but that's fine. Okay. I had two topics in mind that I could present. One is a paper that is already published. It's just got published in the Journal of Public Economics on the European Monetary Union, which is, I think, probably my best paper and very interesting. But in a sense, that's not very common to do. When you have a paper published, you don't go around presenting it. So what you typically do is you look at things you are working on. I want to present that and get some feedback on that paper. So that's what I'm going to do now. I've got a paper that is incomplete. It's called Political Forecast Cycles, as you can see on the slide. I should admit, it is not as far as I would have hoped to. It has a theoretical model and it has some empirics that we can discuss. And I hope very much that you can inspire me with more ideas how to proceed with this paper, because I thought it's also a topic that could be interesting in Indonesia. Deforestation is about cutting forests in general, but rainforests, I guess, in Indonesia. And political means that there is a political motive behind it, that the government might be interested in doing that just before an election to get revenue from this deforestation and use that revenue for getting re-elected. This links to work that I've been doing on political budget cycles. So the idea that the government uses and manipulates the budget in order to impress upon voters that it is competent because it has a lot of resources that can give goodies out to people and allow them to do some fiscal policies and transfers that impress upon people that the government is actually good government. Okay, I should say, I mean, I know that in the Netherlands we sometimes have the problem that people don't understand everything that we are saying, that the English is maybe a bit too complicated and I'm not used to using simple words. So I'll try my best, but if you have a problem, also a problem in language, yeah, don't shy away, just ask. So if you're in the audience somewhere out there in the ether online listening, just scream into your microphone and then you can ask. Or if you're here, just interrupt me. So let's make this as easy as possible. All right. So I see this protest up there. I'm not using that. I'm not used to standing above my students or my audience. So I want to stand here down. But that may make it more difficult for you to see on the slide. So just complain if there's anything that you don't like. Okay. So let's see. Oh yeah, I still want to say something. Can you still hear me like that? When I'm a bit further away? Okay, this is a joint work with two other people. The guy with the long name in the middle is a Mexican who just came to Rabu University and he's doing his PhD and he's working on deforestation. And then I was discussing the paper with him. We had this idea of looking at the political interference or the using of deforestation for political purposes. And Yu Wang is a former PhD student of mine who's more doing the technical aspects. So we have more empiricist, technical person, and myself to work together on this paper. Yes, I also at the bottom it says that I gave the presentation in Singapore at ESSEC, which is a French grande école in French dependency in Singapore. That was the first leg of my tour here in Singapore and Indonesia. Now, good job. Where do I have pointed? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So why this paper? There are two routes, if you like. One is the empirical observation that came to Emiliano, the Mexican who came to Nijmegen. He's talking about deforestation and that this actually changes in election years. So in election years, there's more deforestation. How can we explain that? And what determines that the government chooses to have more deforestation? As a second source, there are these theoretical models that have been working on quite a lot on political budget cycles, which explain how the government can manipulate voters in elections. This leads to cyclical fiscal behavior. In the election year, the government spends a lot, incurs some deficit, which then maybe repays in the after election years, and then the spending goes down. So there's boost, contraction. So this is a cycle, up and down, always in an election year with this. So can we include in such a political budget cycle model this idea of deforestation? Can we also have explain the cyclical behavior of deforestation? Okay. So I hope you, on those who are listening online, can still hear me when I speak like that. If not, or if it's not good quality, then just tell us, okay? Because we don't know what you hear. So just tell us. Feel free to tell us. Not a problem. All right. So from these ideas that we put together, we look at a model, a theoretical model. So in that sense, this presentation will be quite challenging. I want to take you inside of the theoretical model and give you an idea of how we can capture such an idea of a political budget or deforestation cycle, and then explain intuitively what we're doing. Okay? So you don't have to understand every single bit of the mathematics in this model, but it would be good if you understood the intuition there. Okay, and then from that, then we look at empirics. So we're not that far in the empirics yet. We have just a few preliminary regression analyses in which we see some effects and already see that maybe our theoretical model is not better. So we have to improve it. And that's also a motivation for going around giving presentations. Because you, the audience, are supposed to help us. If it's an important comment, you will even be mentioned in the paper. We thank you for your comment. Huh? So make sure that you contribute to this. All right. So let me just go tell you what we're going to do. Quick look at deforestation, political budget cycles as the underlying elements. What is the research question? Then we move to the theoretical model, which is the longest part. Then we have some discussion of data and empirical model, and then the conclusion. And as I said, your task is to check that what we do is make sense. That's how academia works. You throw out some ideas, you get feedback, and people tell you what silly things you're doing, why the model is stupid, or what you're missing, so that we can improve. And we fertilize each other. I'm presenting here, and when you're doing your PhD, you're getting feedback from the supervisor, and that's the academic process. Okay, deforestation. Probably you know more about deforestation than I do, because in Indonesia this is an issue. So within the last 20 years, half a million of square miles were deforested in the province. That's a huge area. That's a huge area. And this has an effect, a significant. I think it has an impact of 10% of global. This thing seems to work only when I'm very nice to it all the time. Okay. Biodiversity is also an issue. You're cutting down natural habitats for many species, then you have a biodiversity problem. Tropical forests represent 10%, but biodiversity is largely happening there. So this is really crucial that we get this cutting down. Okay. There has been literature on elections and democracies and how they respond to deforestation. But the idea of this paper that in a democracy, full democracy, half democracy, there's using deforestation as a political element. And there's evidence that there are these cycles in election years when you have competitive elections. Okay, so what is it that we want to invest in? A large amount of forests is owned by governments. Therefore, governments have the possibility to use that to obtain some revenue. So, for instance, charge taxes or cut forests to settle businesses. cut and get receive taxes from those businesses. You could also think of the revenue from cutting the wood, just selling the wood. We don't distinguish about that. We just say, think about revenue from deforestation. For us, it's pretty clear deforestation can be used for obtaining additional revenue. So some papers have analyzed this link. What we want to do is, what are the mechanisms that drive this? And we want to figure out what features, what elements, what conditions in the economy exist such that this political manipulation. Okay, we want to use a type of models that has been used in a different context when we talk about political business or budget. So this is actually two strands of the literature that are very close to one another. The idea is always the same, that you want to use economic policy to manipulate election outcomes. There are basically, I would argue, there are 4 generations in this literature. First generation was something that many of you may have heard about, the Nordhaus model of political business cycles. So the first idea that the government uses the central bank in a situation when the central bank is not completely free. It uses the central bank, instructs the central bank to boost the economy in an election. Actually, this type of manipulation has been found to be not really happening. So empirically, there's no strong evidence. But the idea was quite ingenious, and there are some cases when it did happen. So, for instance, Nixon used it in the US in his election campaign in the 1970s. What they did here in this model was think about adaptive expectations. So, does everybody know what adaptive expectations are? Know what adaptive expectations are? Adaptive expectations. No? So you adapt your expectations for what happened in the past. So the past, there's something happening in the past, and you take that as evidence for what is happening in the future. You're not considering that something might change in today's world. That's when we move to rational expectation. When we take into account all the information that we, well, actually, that was the foresight. When we take all the information that we have available at the moment, at a particular moment in time, and then for the best possible, that's rational expectation. So that's the next step in this development of literature. What I call the second generation political, and now it would be budget cycle policy, because Rogoff was thinking more in terms of fiscal management. So the government uses fiscal expenditure in something, giving more transfers to people, for instance, in an election year, in order to get re-elected. And the mechanism that Rogoff thought of was a very clever one. He was actually saying, what do people care about what happened this year? I'm actually only interested as a voter to have a government in the next period that is competent. So how do I know that the government in the next period is competent? Well, I look at this period, how the government behaves, is what the government does, giving me an idea of it being competent, so that I want to vote for it in the next period. Now, that's a clever trick that Rogoff introduced. But as all of these models, as it goes in academia, people have fantastic ideas, and then somebody comes around and says, but there's a problem with this, with your model. And indeed, there is a problem with Rogoff. Because Rogoff's idea is that the incumbent knows how competent she is. And that means that she uses this knowledge of her competence to impress upon voters that she's competent. How can you do that? Well, we call that a signaling model. You have to expand fiscal policy sufficiently much that it would be impossible for an incompetent competitor to do the same thing. So only a competent competitor can do the kind of fiscal policy that she does, and therefore can signal to be competent. Well, in consequence, this means that only a competent incumbent can actually use political manipulation. But that doesn't sound good. Not right. I mean, if you think about your own experience, it's not only the competent people who can signal that they're competent and manipulate. You would also expect that incompetent people, incompetent politicians, are able to manipulate and stay in power. So Rogov's idea is nice, but empirically wrong. Therefore, we have a third generation of political budget cycles by Xi and Svensson. Their idea is that some voters are uninformed. Politicians, like voters, do not know in advance whether they're competent, which makes a lot of sense. Because think about the COVID crisis. The government did not know whether it was competent in dealing with this crisis or not. As with many other things. So some voters are uninformed, and for the incumbent, it is always pays to exert. Actually, on this screen, I can show it. Oh, sorry. Yeah. No, that's okay. That's okay. Don't worry. So where was I? Yes. So the incumbent exerts a hidden fiscal effort, the moral hazard problem, to appear more competent and thereby impress the voters. I'm competent, they vote for me, and voters will understand this message, or believe it, and therefore the incumbent can increase re-election chances. Now, empirically, this model is also problematic because when you solve the model, you think about rational expectations, and voters will then, uninformed voters, in the end, believe exactly what the informed voters believe and understand in a way that the government manipulates. But if they understand that the government manipulates, then there's no effect of the manipulation. But that's only in equilibrium. That's very complicated. Has anybody worked with the barrel model? Same. This is the same story. So there's a trap. Voters, in this case, vote for the government. That's the kind of consistency problem in this case. It's the same idea. Voters are in a trap. They, even though they know that the government is doing something bad, they cannot change it and have to accommodate what the government does. But the effect is that there is no electoral effect. So the government doesn't get an advantage from the manipulation. And of course, that doesn't make sense either, because the whole idea of manipulation is that you get electoral effect and that you get re-elected more easily. Okay. Nonetheless, we use that, with a colleague from Portugal, on looking at political forecast cycles, and I'm mentioning this because we're talking today about deforestation cycles. This is yet another idea of this cycle idea, political cycle idea. In this case, that the government has an advantage by manipulating forecasts of the economy. Okay. Then there's something I would call the fourth generation, but it's a bit presumptuous because this is largely my own papers. So probably not. What is the idea? Well, what about moving away from this fictitious idea of rational? Do we really have rational expectations? And even if you think that some people have rational expectations, does everybody have rational expectations? Does that make sense? Well, then we argue no. It could be that they're not fully. Okay. And I'll just add here some advertisement for material that is coming out in the Encyclopedia of Public Choice. 2 articles on political budget cycles that we're working on last well, more than a year already. But as with these encyclopedias, very often they always get delayed. So you think in a year it's done, and then it takes 2 years, takes 3 years to actually done. So, but if you want to read more about this, place to go. Okay. So the fourth generation of opportunistic political budget cycle models. 2 elements. One, they're uninformed voters that can be tricked by a government. And the second element is that there is actually an electoral event where the government succeeds in manipulation. And how can you do that? Well, there are two possibilities. One is an idea that goes back to Sims. It's called rational inattention. The idea that it's rational for people not to learn about everything, not to have full information, and therefore they make mistakes. They don't learn about it, but it's rational not to learn about it because it's costly. Information acquisition is costly. Okay? That's one idea. We use that in one of the papers. The other idea is that expectations are not fully rational. And we have a paper in which we generalize that, very recent paper. But here are a few of those ideas. So, I don't know what happened to the quality here. Anyway. Yeah, the screen is nice. So, one idea is you have fiscal illusion. So people do not fully understand the implications of fiscal policy. Why? For instance, because cheaper when you receive money. You don't see how costly it is, where it comes from. And for instance, when the central government passes money down to the lower level, they don't understand that this actually has costs, namely the taxation costs, the efficiencies of taxation. And so if you don't understand how costly it is, you want to spend. And then we set the same idea we use for political budgets. And so that people don't fully understand how costly it is to have a deficit. They only see it when there's a lot of deficit. But when there's not so much, they are not aware of it. They can be tricked. In the second row, this paper is about an incumbency advantage. So I use that in a paper in which the government has an advantage over the competitive challenge. Why is there an advantage? Well, because the government can manipulate, can use propaganda, spread some message, give the impression, the false impression about, for instance, the deficit. I've got a few other ideas which we use for non-fully rational applications. Just this. Oh, sorry. Okay. This third thing here, K-level thinking. Anybody know what K-level thinking is? You heard about it, Ahmed? Say again? Kindergarten. That's basically the idea that in a game, in a game, when I talk to you, for instance, and we have a debate of how we behave. Oh no, we have to do something, and but what you do depends on what I do, and what I do depends on what you do. So your best strategy would be to anticipate what I think. No, for you to think what I would do. My best strategy would be to think what you think what I would do. And your best strategy then would be to think what I think what you do, what I do. Yeah? Etc. Yeah? And if you move up level by level, that's the K level. Yeah? No, that's the point. In a K level game, you don't have the infinity. But what is infinity? That's the important thing. If K goes to infinity, then we're in rational expectations. So if you anticipate all the time how this response is, then we really know that nobody can deviate from response without getting worse. Right? So, but a K level game means that one of us has an advantage. Is one level above the other in understanding this interdependence. Right? And that could again explain a non-fully rational situation in which the government, if it has this advantage, can use the advantage to gain a level. Okay. So a bit detour about opportunistic political budget cycles, because this is something I've been working on for the last 10 years. So I thought it might be nice for you to have a little bit of an idea what kind of work we're doing in this direction. But it is very relevant for this paper because this is the type of thinking, of model that we want to do. So. Good. Yes. Ask questions. In the K level thinking. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. They are all. Yeah. No, I mean, I guess what I wrote down here explicitly, fiscal illusion, incumbency advantage, could also be presented as a K-level thinking problem. Yeah? Exactly. Yeah.
Like data and information, so they are more competent than average people, so they can take things. They can take the public. Actually, very competent.
Yeah. So the question is, who is competent in manipulating or in tricking the other one? Yes, this is exactly the story. So in the rational expectations model, the problem is that even though somebody may have an advantage in doing an expansionary fiscal policy, in equilibrium, the voters who do not see it can still understand it. And therefore, there's no effect of the manipulation. The government would still have to do it, because if it didn't, the public would still expect that they did it. So they have to do it, but there's no advantage. And that works counter our intuition, because we think that the government using fiscal policy for an electoral gain can actually have an effect by using it. With rational expectation, that's not possible. That's why we were looking at a number of alternatives. Okay, did you Yeah. Yeah, that's the way. Yeah, ask questions. Also, if you're somewhere out there, feel free to ask any questions you like. Okay, so let's look at this paper more specifically. Research questions. Ahmad, you said something about 2 hours. Is that right? Okay. Okay. Plenty of time. Right. Do countries actually use deforestation? We want to focus on the revenue. And what are the factors that facilitate? Does it depend on how aware the public is of deforestation? How much they know about the fiscal conditions? Whether the government is selfish, corrupt, or if there is some pre-existing indebtedness, so the government has already some large debt in the past, that they are not so flexible in using more, in getting more deficit, and therefore want to use more revenue from deforestation. Okay. So, what are the results that we get in this analysis at this preliminary stage, as I said? Now, this is not a complete paper, far from. We just have a few ideas at this moment. What are the ideas? Well, we want to look at some stage at country groups and outliers. In terms of determining factors, we have a little bit more of an idea of what might happen. So, to give it away, my idea would have been that there's a difference between public awareness of deforestation and understanding of fiscal manipulations. So I would have thought that education helps people to be more aware of the fiscal conditions. Whereas public awareness, let's say media freedom, for instance, helps for understanding how much deforestation is actually going on. So if there's a lot of deforestation, the media will report it, and we know about it. But empirically, this would be hard to make a distinction. We have the impression that education explains why people understand deforestation, but they also explain why people do or do not understand the fiscal conditions, so the fiscal manipulation. So to be clear again, we have two possibilities. We have got deforestation, and we have a deficit. We can get more deficit to increase revenues. We can deforest more to get more revenue. And the government can use both and play around with them. So we would like to be able to distinguish, but this is not won't be easy, as you will see when I show you the media freedom. We haven't yet this, so we want to see whether this makes sense. Okay, selfishness. Yes, definitely corruption seems to contribute to deforestation, but also better democracy. So if you have a more democratic system, the government seems to use more deforestation as a political tool. So here's the model. I know that many students are typically scared by mathematics. Huh? Don't be scared. It's all easy. Huh? And I won't talk about individual letters here. I just mentioned them, but I want to explain you the intuition. Okay. So if you bear with me and relax, so don't let angst, this fantastic German word, angst. Yeah? Angst. Be afraid of things. Don't let angst rule your behavior. Then you will be able to take something away from this talk. Sorry? Good. We'll see at the end. Yeah? Okay, so we've got individuals. We want to, in a formal model, we want to capture individuals' behavior. What drives individuals? Well, microeconomics 101. First course you do is utility. Okay? So what does our individual in this model get utility from? There are basically two components. That's what's in the brackets. Outside of the brackets, it's just saying we pretend, we don't do it in the end when you solve the model, but we pretend that we look at an infinite horizon. That over all periods from now on. And we discount those periods by beta. So always becoming multiplied with one more of those betas, which is say 0.9. So the effect of what happens in the future becomes smaller. Okay? And then we have E, this is the expectation. So it's just expectation. So forget about all that. Just look at what is between the brackets. That's the important bit. There are two elements. One that looks easy, that's consumption. Individuals typically consume. Okay? And then there is something that captures the political attitudes. So we have economic component, consumption, and the political component is ideological preferences, and we have a trade-off between the two. So if you are more happy on the political side, you will be willing to accept a loss in your consumption. If politically you're completely unhappy, you need a lot of consumption to vote for this government. To like this government. Okay. So what is the political component? There is a phi, first Greek letter, which just says the weight. Forget about that as well. Just to make life complicated. Then the interesting two bits. That's a theta I, and a Z or ZS. So the theta captures your own individual political conviction. And we measure it, this is a simple model. Yeah? It looks complicated, but it's rather simple. What's the idea? Well, we have an individual that could have preferences between -1 and +1. What is -1 +1? Well, one party, the other party. Okay? So if your preference is -1, you're very, very strongly in favor of one party. If your preference is -0.1, a little bit in favor of one party. But you could also imagine vote for the other. When would you vote for the other party? Well, if the other party can promise you to increase your consumption level. Now that's the trade-off in this model. So if the government manages to convince you that your consumption will be higher, then even though you don't like this government very much, you might still vote for it. Of course, if you despise that government, you will never vote for them, even though they can improve your consumption level. But that's where you can see, yeah, if we now say voters are dispersed identically over this -1 to +1 line, then when you as a government can convince some voters that they should vote for you even though they don't like you very much, you win it. So you have to make sure that they believe they get a higher level of consumption than they would with the other government. That's the mechanism in this. So it's very simple. Just put in formulae, looks a bit more complex. Okay? But that's the basic intuition, this trade-off between the economic component and the political. Okay. Now, we say we have 3 types of voters. They have different levels of information. So we say, first of all, we could have informed voters. Voters who see the level of deficit that the government creates and the level of deforestation. Okay, clear. Then we say we have partially informed voters. They can see the deforestation, G, but they cannot see the deficit. Okay. Now you could also say, why not the other way around? You could also say they see D and not G. Well, we argue this is more complex. It's more difficult to actually understand the fiscal conditions of the country than to hear in the press that there's deforestation going on or to see the smoke. Huh? Okay? So we're making an assumption that it is easier to see deforestation than deficit. That reduces our informed, uninformed voters to 3 instead of 4. Otherwise, we would have CD, not CD, CG, not CG. Like that. It has an advantage because we're going to play around later on with changing the size of different groups. How does that influence our result? Like that. All right. So a little complication here is that this theta that I said runs from -1 to +1, your personal political preference, gets affected by how much deforestation you see. If you observe deforestation, you actually don't like it. Huh? You might not like it just a little bit. Huh? And the more deforestation there is, the more this -1 to +1 gets shifted, which means that it's away from you and more in favor of the other. I don't want to get into the details of all the coefficients and variables we use, just to get this general idea. Okay. Okay. What about politicians? Politicians are actually not so bad, because they also like consumption. What is between the brackets? There's consumption, but they can also be pretty nasty, because if they're elected, that's the I indicator function. So if they're elected, this I becomes 1. But in this period, they have what we call an ego, the X. So we have also an economic component C and a political rent, the benefit from being in office. But they only get it if they're in office. That's the I. It's going to be 1 or 0. Okay. And the other stuff here that you see, the sum of the betas and the expectations, that's just for mathematical correctness, but in terms of content, it doesn't matter. Okay. That's always the trick in understanding mathematics that is used in economics. You have to try to understand what is the mathematics used for, and what elements do we really need to understand what's going on. So in this case, what we really need is the C and the X. The X can switch off, on and off, with I being 0 or 1. Okay? Right. Then we have a budget constraint, which says that we make life simple. We don't have taxes or anything like that. We just say individuals can consume what they receive every period, which is constant, the Y, income, plus, and that's where the model comes in, the transfers. The government can give them some goodies. Child benefit, healthcare, something that the government provides in addition to what it normally does. And And this is here in the election year, the government can give them some additional transfers. So then, of course, you have to check where these transfers come from. How can the government provide transfers? So that looks a bit more complicated, but it's not really, because just think, the government can use more resources by creating deficit. So if you have a deficit now, you can use it to pay for transfers. But of course, you have to repay your deficit from the previous period. Everything that you had in the previous period, 1 plus the interest rate, you have to repay. Which net could be still that you're having some deficit. If the D could be higher than dt minus 1. The dt could be higher than the dt minus 1, right? Then you're increasing your deficit. But this is just to close the model, to have a complete model that we include everything, the deficit now, but also the repayment of the deficit in the previous. Then we have deforestation, and we have revenue from deforestation. Now, the simple thing would be to say we just have G. The amount of deforestation that's going on gives us revenue. Now, if you put that in a model like that, then the solution of the model is actually not a proper solution, because the best thing for the government would be to deforest to infinity. Use as much as you can, because it's a revenue that comes out of nothing, and you don't have to repay it. So we have to limit that. We have to argue that wrong button. We have to argue that this decreases with how much you've done in the previous period. So there's a limitation to the positive effect of deforestation. So one of the arguments would then have been to say, well, we have we deforested more last period, than this period it becomes more difficult. Okay. Then just to complete this model, we were talking about competence. There is a competence shock. This is very deep into the model, because basically what voters want to try is to extract how competent the government is. What is this competence shock? It wants to extract it from the information of the government that it gets from the government. Okay? From the government's behavior. So technically this has to be over 2 periods, but don't worry about that. Just something that makes it more efficient for the government to create transfers. Okay. So actually, I mean, if you look at this, it's not that complicated. You've got a politician who has got social motive as well as ego motive. You've got voters who've got a political motive as well as their economic consumption motive. You've got a simple budget constraint, and the government can provide transfers with additional revenues that it gets. And we're not talking about the normal taxation. Okay? This is the additional revenue that the government gets from either the deficit creation or from deforestation. Okay? That's the model, that's it. Of course, the model solution is complex. So this is not so easy. Let's see what's happened. We solved this model as a 2-period method. And you may have noticed that we have a problem with that, because we are always thinking about the effect of deforestation in the previous period. So if deforestation in the previous period, if there's an effect of deforestation in the previous period on today's period, then we also have an effect of today's period on the future period. Therefore, the more you deforest, the more you're restricting your revenue in the future. So actually, you would have to solve this as an infinite problem. Solve at the far end in infinity, and then bring it backwards to today's problem. So this is a problem we haven't resolved. We don't know how to deal with it. Although my colleague James Lim in Singapore said he thinks we should reformulate the issue of this loss from deforestation. Anyway, just to give you the idea that it's not always straightforward just to write down the model and solve it. You have to think about the implications and how you can do it. So we have to think about the timing of events. What's happening in this moment to understand better what's going on. We have an election period, we have an off-election. The off-election period is very important because in the off-election period, the government or the incumbent can get a rent. And this is why the incumbent wants to win. Okay, so how does it work? In period T, the election period, the incumbent decides on the two instruments. The incumbent can use G, deforestation, and it can use E, the deficit. Okay? And this allows the government to provide transfers to impress upon people that it is a common government. We have informed voters. They observe everything. They're clever, know how much deforestation is going on, how much deficit. They can transfer everybody. This is what ends up in your pocket as a consumer. As a voter. You know how much to go. But the G and the D is not always. You can also see how competent the government was. But with all this information, you are able to deduct what the competence of the government in this period, because you know the resources that went into giving you transfers, the G and the D, and you see what came out of it. So you know how competent the government was in providing them. Okay? And then they cast a vote for the candidate who they competently delivers a higher utility. Okay. What about uninformed voters? And I've put them together, informed and partially informed and uninformed voters, because in principle it's the same. So let's just look at the uninformed voters to illustrate. So they observe T. What is in brackets? Ignore that. That refers to the partially informed voters. So the uninformed voters only observe T, but not D and G. And the past period competence. So they have to form expectations of how competent the government is, based on what they think that how much deforestation and how much deficit the government. You notice here I was struggling with getting this E hat like this one. Okay. Then they cast their vote. In the off-election period, the winner takes office, repays the fiscal instrument, but does not have to repay the G. Okay? Does not have to repay deforestation. Of course. After the forest once, you're not reforested. That's pretty unrealistic. So the revenue from the G just stays. Okay? And voters do not matter here. They cannot vote. So the government can cut the transfers, have negative transfers, tax people to repay the deficit, because voters have no right at this point. They only come into play the next election cycle. Okay, so let me give you an idea of how this model is solved. And again, you don't have to understand everything. It's just that you have an idea what we do. Rogoff's idea. I mean, who knows Ken Rogoff? Know Ken Rogoff? Nobel Prize? Nobel Prize already? By the way, my Nobel Prize story, my favorite Nobel Prize story is the one of Bob Lucas, who is, in my view, the most ingenious economist of all times, because he invented several things. He's not just known for one thing where he should get the Nobel Prize for, but several things, including the rational expectations idea, but also the Lucas supply curve and other things. So Bob Lucas divorced from his wife, and they had a divorce agreement. His wife insisted that Bob Lucas would have to give her half of the Nobel Prize money if he got the Nobel Prize before the age of 50. So they probably negotiated. And Bob Lucas thought, nobody has ever got the Nobel Prize before the age of 50. He got it at the age of 49. Okay. Okay, back to this. So voters, and this is Rogoff's idea. That's why I started. Yeah? Ken Rogoff, also a very famous economist, who had this second generation budget cycle model, and his intuition on this is clearly: a voter is not interested in today. A voter is interested in what I can get in tomorrow. After the election, I would like to have a government that is competent. So it's about competence extraction. And here we start out by looking at the probability of a voter to vote for an incumbent based on what the voter thinks she can get in the next period. So the voter would vote for the incumbent if in the next period she gets more from the incumbent A than from the challenger B. That's the basic idea. And what comes out of this is then exactly what I told you at the beginning when we were talking about the trade-off in utility for voters. If the voter thinks that there is a positive competence of the incumbent, in other words, the incumbent is more competent than the challenger, then a voter will be willing to vote for this incumbent, even if they slightly disagree with it. They have political preferences for the other party. Not too much, but sufficiently much to not outweigh this advantage of. That's the intuition that comes out of the result when solving this. Okay, makes a lot of sense. If you notice, one of the politicians is better, or you think politicians better, then you vote for that politician, even though this you actually don't like that politician. Okay, then we can look at the probability of voter I to vote for the incumbent. We can distinguish between informed, uninformed, and partially informed voters. We can look at the probability of winning for the incumbent. So we're basically putting together all these probabilities of partially informed, informed, and uninformed voters with the weight those groups have. The delta and the alpha and most of them. It's all complex, yeah? But you have to abstract from all the mathematics to what is what is the message of this. And the message is simple. You have to just look at all voters and look at the probability of them voting. Okay, there is the competence extraction problem that we have to look in. Then we have to solve this and look at the incumbent's probability of winning as a whole. Then we can use, if the incumbent knows what the probability of winning is, dependent on his or her choices, then we can ask the incumbent to maximize. The incumbent would want to maximize her utility. Okay? And she's taking into account the chance of winning. So the incumbent would like to get the maximum possible consumption and ego rent in the first period, plus in the second period, if she wins, but if she loses, only the consumption, not the ego. Okay? You plug everything in that is relevant here, and you can derive first order conditions. Who has derived for first order conditions before? Have you? First order conditions, you know what that is? When you maximize a problem, and you want to specify a condition for the instrument that you use to be optimal. And these are the conditions. So we need two, one for deficit and one for deforestation. Okay? And we can interpret these conditions that get complex. So I want to derive propositions. These are now the results of this is more than the optimal solution for the incumbent, because for propositions you look at comparative status. What happens if one of the exogenous component in the model changes? So if, for instance, the ego rent is higher, so the politician is more of a bastard, is more interested in self-serving, is more corrupt, for instance. Then what is the effect on deficit? Now, if the politician is more interested in being in power, that means the politician wants to win. How do you win? Well, the model says increase your deficit. Why increase the deficit? Because you can increase your transfers with it. Okay? And that impresses upon people that you're competent and they will vote. That's the logic. Now, and I'm showing you all the complications of this model because don't read the text, just look at the bottom. It says that the effect of changing the ego rent, so the politician becoming more selfish, more interested in being in power in the next period, on deforestation is 0. And we're worried about that result, because we don't like that. We don't like that result, because we would have thought that when you're more interested in the next period, you would also want to use more revenues. So we still have to understand why we get this result. Maybe think about changing the models to get to a result that is more convincing. Or maybe this result makes sense if we can show that empirically that it makes sense. But we do. Okay. Proposition number 2. When voters become more aware of deforestation, that's the alpha. So they understand the share of people who understand deforestation becomes larger. So they are more aware of deforestation. More voters will support the challenger instead of the incumbent. They don't like it. Or they will actually go for the opposite. So what does that mean? Well, it makes sense for the incumbent to reduce deforestation because that drives voters away from it. Okay? As more voters become aware of deforestation, it depends on some conditions what the effect is on deficit. So we are not there yet either. We don't know exactly how to interpret that. Okay, then that's proposition 3. I said not yet. We are not there at all at this point. I'll just skip that. I would like to look at something. Okay. So this is relief, huh? now the difficult stuff is over, but I mean the beauty of I mean I'm a theorist. I'm convinced that the theory is essentially necessary, of course. But the beauty of a theory is, first of all, it helps you to clear your thoughts. It forces you to think very rigorously of how you can capture something. And actually, the paper, the last paper I mentioned earlier, the 2024 paper that I just published recently, was actually based on a result that we got theoretically before we even thought of it that it could be empirically relevant. So we thought of it and then we said, okay, interesting result. Let's look at the empirics, and the empirics show true. It's actually what. So theory can push you to understanding and thinking about new concepts and new ideas. This one here. Yeah. What is difficult?
For optimization.
The temporal optimization. Well, we're cheating. We only have 2 periods. Quite difficult. Yeah. Well, I mean, if we wanted to solve something like that in an infinite horizon setting, that would be indeed very, very complex. And I don't think it's possible here. This model would be. Then we would have to resort to simulation analysis. I prefer to understand the mechanisms in a small model where not everything is included, but everything is included that is needed for this problem, that's contributing to this problem. All right. So have they all gone on the internet? They're finished? It's only the screen or the yeah. So if we still have some audience, then we might need that screen. Yeah, but then they don't see the screen. Oh, they can see this screen. Yeah, but not really. Maybe we have to put this thing there. Online, they can see the screen.
We can see the slide.
Okay, good. Then it's fine. Otherwise, I would be really worried. Yeah? Okay. So let's look at the empirical. This is what they have so far. Okay. So what does the theory say? Political deforestation cycles may exist, in addition, possibly, to political function cycles. And we can see that there is some influence of the share of informedness or uninformedness. Okay, these were the propositions. Okay, let's look what we have. So how can we measure the share of uninformed voters in the real world? And as I said before, is there can we make an empirical distinction between these 2 types of informedness? What I call awareness, the informedness about deforestation, and the informedness about the fiscal condition, the deficit. Okay. So my idea would have been to think about media freedom, press freedom, as allowing people to see deforestation, and on the other hand, education as the deeper understanding of what's going on in the economy, the fiscal components. Okay, there's a lot of data here, which I'm not sure whether I want to get into. I can. Did I send you the presentation already? I haven't sent you the presentation. So if anybody wants to have the presentation, I can send it. No paper yet. So methodology, what do we do? At the first stage, we want to look separately at the effects that we can see for deficit and for deforestation. So for deforestation, some research has been done and they use two-way fixed effects. A number of control variables. Basically, what we want to capture is the effect on deforestation of elections and elections combined with some effects. So some additional effects. And I'll show you in a minute what these additional effects are. Education, corruption, and at the same time, but using a different methodology, we would like to understand the political budget cycle. So the deficit, I don't know why this is F now, but colleague who prepared the slide, F is supposed to be deficit, depends on also the previous year deficit, but then on election and on a number of aspects like education, corruption, democracy, and the interaction of those aspects in an election. Okay, so let's look. I've got 3 slides on empirical results. So the first one says something about the effect of fiscal deficit and deforestation onto one another. So intuitively, you would think that if a government increases the deficit, then it has additional resources to relieve the deforestation, to have to rely less on revenue from deforestation. But there's a trade-off. Either you use one instrument or the other, or at least you're trading them off. And this is exactly what we get in our result. Yeah? So, the deforestation without elections, fiscal deficit on deforestation has a negative effect. That's column number 1. Deforestation when you include elections. I can hardly see this anymore. Then that's good. Do anything because there's this other view. I can switch to the full view. Right? If I switch, I want to have the picture. If you're messing it up, then I do with that. So it seems that I not only ruined this screen, but also this, all in one presentation. 2 screens go. thank you. Oh, so that's much better. That is much better. Okay. So deforestation has a fiscal deficit has a negative effect on deforestation. Okay. In an election year, there is less. There is more deforestation. Yes, that's correct. But the fiscal deficit in an election year has also a negative. So the fiscal deficit and deforestation go in the opposite direction. That's the message from the left-hand side of this first results slide. Okay, if you look at the right, that's a good question. For cover, no, this is the effect of how much potential deforestation there is. How much forest do you have to allow for deforestation? Yeah. Red box.
So deficits and then what else?
Yes, that's competitive election.
Competitive election. Oh, wow. And the bottom, fiscal deficit and competitive. Oh, interaction. Oh, that's good. Thank you, Pak Ahmad.
That's the trick.
Very good, very good.
Hey, that's how we do it.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Oh, now I can read from there as well. Huh? Okay. All right. So, yeah. So what you see is that fiscal deficit and deforestation are trading off. If one of them goes up, the other one goes down. You don't need so much revenue from the other instrument. And in election years, this effect is even stronger. Okay. And
The correlation is negative means that the higher fiscal deficit, the lower is the deforestation. Is it because fiscal deficit is financed by something else than the revenue from deforestation? Is it underlying assumption that
Well-
fiscal deficit is financed by some other?
So the fiscal deficit is not financed. The fiscal deficit is the finance. You create a deficit.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You borrow money.
Yeah.
And what you do with the money, you use it to spend.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So it's a trade-off, right?
Trade-off between the two.
Yeah.
The two resources that you have. Now, one is you borrow. The other one is you borrow from nature. You borrow. You cut down trees. Yeah. And on the right-hand side, we get the same thing. This is now, that's okay. On the right-hand side, we have the opposite causality. We look at how is fiscal deficit affected by deforestation. And again, we see this negative sign. And well, in competitive elections, it's not made stronger, but it is there, and or at least the 0.003 in column 4 for deforestation times competitive election is not significant, but it is it has the right sign. Okay. So this is our result number 2, in which we look at education. So now we want to understand what is the effect of education on deforestation and fiscal deficit, right? And if you remember how I argued before, my intuition would have been education should have an impact on the fiscal variables, but not necessarily on the deforestation. If you're educated or not, you will also see what's going on, and it will be in the press, it will be discussed. So I'm actually surprised about this result. So my intuition was wrong. Okay. Huh? So what can we see here is namely that education, and I can make it bigger. Okay. Let's try. Oh. This was the deforestation column. If education goes up, there's more education, then people are wary of deforestation. They're worried about it. They are more skeptical, and and the government chooses to deforest less. Now, this is the negative sign of education. Now, in a competitive election, you get a positive sign for competitive election, which we are in column 2. We are on this slide. Just for those that are following online, column 2 in this box, we still have a negative effect of education on deforestation. Election by themselves has a positive effect. If there's an election, they have with the typical electoral manipulation argument. But when an election happens is interacted with the education, this effect is again reduced. So education has overall a negative effect on deforestation. That's a good question. Honestly, I cannot remember what we did because I think we have the number of high school leavers or something like that. Because we need something cross country. So we need for a panel data analysis. We need something that exists in all countries. We have some simple measures. Yeah? Okay, so what about education for deficit? We can see exactly the same thing, except that there's no additional negative effect of education in an election. The interaction effect is not significant, but again, we have this negative effect of education, right? Wait, so that you all. What was it?
I think the variable competitive election in the first without the education was statistically significant. Here it's not, right?
Yes. Here it's not significant. So in yeah. So maybe this is an indication in the direction I was thinking of, that education. No, actually, it should be the other way around. I would have expected the other way around. That that for fiscal variables, education plays a role stronger than for the deforestation, and it does not. So it does play a role in general for having deficit, but not relevant for education, which is actually not consistent with empirical results we get in other papers. We do get the result that education has a clear impact on deficit. Yeah. So there's still something not fully correct here. We are worried about.
Yeah. I think you also want to expect the competitive election here is negative because of the education.
The competitive education per se, you mean?
The competitive election per se, yes.
No, per se, I would always expect a
okay, but
positive aspect because elections should trigger a manipulation motive for the government.
But you expect the competitive election interact with education is negative.
Yeah. Would expect that it's negative. It is negative, but not significant.
Yes. Right.
Okay.
Itu udah.
Question in the off? No. All right. Let's go to our last slide. That's the empirical slide. So I'm sorry, I can't serve with a lot of empirics here because we're just at the beginning stage. This is actually an interesting one in some sense because we included some political components, if you want to call corruption a political component. So here first on the left-hand side, we have deforestation. Let's focus on that. So corruption has a positive effect on deforestation. Not very surprising, right? Well, that's what some people would argue. That's the only reason for deforestation. Yeah. You can sell it to some of your friends and cronies. Democracy has a positive effect on deforestation. Now that's shocking, of course. Yeah. But there may actually be an explanation. So the more democratic a country is, the more you actually want to make use of this electoral manipulation. So there, in these circumstances, you can use it. So in Indonesia, you might be able to use it more than in Singapore, for instance. Huh?
For the incumbent to use the deforestation money to use the deforestation money to support its election process and to win.
Yeah.
Yeah. In a democracy system.
I mean,
I guess.
I mean, this is very tricky to disentangle. Democracy per se. Would we also have to include media freedom? If you have more media freedom in a more democratic system, you would argue that this is not working. Or maybe there's interaction between democracy and media freedom. That would be highly significant and working against more deforestation. So we're definitely not there.
Can I
go ahead? Ask as many questions as you like. And
that's
great.
Your period is 2001 to 2020.
Yeah.
I think we also have to take into account the social media kind of boom that inject to this whole variable about the media freedom. Yes, media is freedom, but is it going to give you the correct information, the legitimate information, or the incumbent who has better information use the social media and all of that media to provide what you call a trick information to get them elected? Disinformation, kind of that. Yeah.
So this the question of whether you have incumbency advantage that can be used, and especially used in the period in which the social media may be possible. That's good, very good point.
Thank you. Oh, ya udah. Oke. Oh iya. Yeah, I'm curious about the sample of countries that you use in in your research, especially about the level of the development. Given that now people are more educated, and the information about the forest deforestation also more open now. I think that it is because it is related to the level of the development. I mean that it is possible that people now are more aware about the sustainability related to the deforestation, but actually they don't really care because they are myopic. I mean, yes, I understand about the negative effect of the deforestation, but my welfare in the short period is more important than the than the than in the long run, because I don't understand what will happen in the long run, but probably in the next term of the politician, I will get more benefit than I will get more welfare. And I guess it is related to the level of the development of the countries in the sample. So if the sample is more developed country, I think the result would be different. Thank you.
So we have something like that here. Of the GDP per capita, which is 3 above the box. Yeah, for column 1 and column 2, GDP per capita, and it says that higher GDP per capita has a negative impact on deforestation. And it goes a bit in the direction that you are thinking of.
Yeah, but the interaction with the other particles is.
You mean interaction with elections or?
With democracy.
Mm-hmm.
Why more democracy? Why having more democracy increase the possibility of deforestation? Usually democracy happens in the more advanced countries. So yeah, for me it is quite counter.
Yeah. So the question was about the interaction between democracy and GDP, or GDP per capita, the income development of a country. Is it possible that because the economic conditions in a country become better, that democracy then has some impact? Yeah.
Probably when they interact, that is not democracy.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for this. Thanks for this. Very good. We'll have a look at it. Thank you. Okay, let me just move on with these slides here. Do we have to finish at 12 exactly, or 10 minutes? Wow, that's very generous. This is the nice thing about Indonesia. People are always so nice and accommodating. So we'll just talk for another half hour. No, not half an hour. All right. So here you can see the effect of corruption interacted with democracy. Yeah, this has a negative effect, but is not significant. But corruption and competitive elections, that is a push. This drives our deforestation. So in an election period, corruption is even more important. And to the negative, to driving deforestation. But democracy and competitive election, similar. We already said that this is A surprising result, which could have some explanation that when it's more democratic, then you can use this inflation more, and therefore deforestation is used more. Okay, let me move to the right-hand side. This is fiscal deficit. Yeah. Here we have that if we ignore election components, then corruption and democracy have a negative effect on the fiscal deficit. But in the last column, you see that corruption is no longer significant. But when you look at corruption interacted with competitive elections, then it has a negative effect. Similarly to democracy. So these results to me are not so clear at all. So here we still need a lot more interpretation. Any more comments?
I'm Ari, colleagues of Pak Ahmad Komarozaman and Pak Rudi. I'm still trying hard to digest the mathematical model. So basically, please correct me if I'm wrong. There are two utility functions, the voters and the politicians, and I, I don't understand with the constraint. The constraint for each utility functions constraint. So all economists should understand that any other agent in economy would like to maximize the utility, right? So there should be at least one constraint, and then in the end there is practically there is the result using data. There is this equation, and this equation is the result of trying to solve the questions how either the deforestation or the budget deficit would impact the utility, right? Either the utility of voters or the politicians, based on envelope theorem, comparative static. You said that. So what is based on my understanding about.
Thank you. Thank you. Nice that you're asking again. So this also shows me what I could have explained better. So to make it clear, we have two agents, two types of agents. We have voters, we have the government, the incumbent, not the challenger. That's the challenger is silent. And the voters also are not active in the sense that they cannot maximize their economic outcomes. And the only one that is optimizing is the government. The government tries to optimize its utility, which is based on a social component, consumption, and being in power, an egoistic component. Okay? And the government has to base that on the chance of being in power. That depends on voters' willingness to vote for them. So they try to manipulate using two instruments, deforestation and the deficit, to impress upon voters that they are competent and that voters will vote for them. The government has a budget constraint, which you saw. This is the transfers. The transfers are determined by what they can do with these additional revenues. Huh? And this budget constraint allows them then to give transfers to voters who get utility, can consume based on an exogenous output or income and these additional transfers. And then on this basis, voters decide who they vote for. And this voting decision is then part of the optimization decision of the incumbent. The incumbent needs to know how voters respond to how the government, the incumbent, uses the instruments of deforestation and deficit. Does that make it a little bit clearer? If not, or
For the case of US, when Trump won, the transfer being translated into the jargon of "Make America Great Again." And for Indonesian case, that in February happened in February, it's being translated into literally free lunch program. I think so. And then the next questions are
problem would be the deforestation problem.
so yes, so the source of fund of freelance came from deforestation, deforestation, I think so. But that it makes me questions another question, that how much portion of the government budget came from the deforestation? I don't think every country has the same portion or significant portion. For example, this is the other questions. Does the incumbent allocate the source of funds from deforestation for next period development or economic development, or for entertaining the firms that got the right for deforestation, and some elites in political parties?
Well, I mean, I believe that there are many issues with deforestation. Deforestation can be used for sensible purposes as well, as you said, for a fund that is used for development or something. And I'm sure that Emiliano, my co-author, is going to explore a lot of this in his PhD thesis. But this is beyond this project. This is purely looking at the possibilities that deforestation offer for political manipulation. And one of the questions you had is a good one, which we are also not so clear yet about. I'm not saying the other thing was not good, but the other thing doesn't relate to the paper directly. So the question of this trade-off, how can we capture the trade-off in our model more precisely? So maybe we have to think of different variants of the model in which we have a certain level of the deficit given, and see what happens when we allow for deforestation. If this fluctuates and the other one stays the same, I'm not sure. But we are not there yet. But that's a good question. How can we actually show more clearly in the model that there is actually in the model? Empirically, we can show it. Well, it's preliminary result. The empirics has to be a bit more elaborate, but there we can show. Does that answer your question somewhat? If you're not satisfied, ask again.
Let other audience.
Okay. Anybody else?
There is one question from the Zoom from Mr. Daniel Bernardo. I think you can open your mic to asking your question, please.
Okay, thank you. I just curious, I want to ask about the unit of observation here that you use in the model. So in this model, do you able to distinguish the eligible sample between the incumbent who are able or not able to run for the next election? Because usually for the incumbent, they can only lead for maybe 2 periods of time. But after the second period, because they cannot run again, they probably will have less grid to do something like deforestation to have revenue from it. So do you able to distinguish between this kind of problem that maybe distort your model? Thank you.
Actually, I could not catch what you were asking. So, wait a second. Ahmad is trying to translate.
I try to translate. So in the case, for example, in the case of Indonesia, the president can only run for 2 times. In period, 2 times consecutively. And then he is asking whether the motivation will be different for those who the first runner and then for the second run. Or he already ran for the second time.
Yeah, that's a good question. It doesn't directly relate to this paper because here that would be very difficult to disentangle. I mean, we could put in a dummy, but that's not the focus of the paper. But there is actually a lot of research on term limits that you cannot run as long as you like, but there's a limited number of terms that you can run, and it is shown that when there are term limits, then this political motive in political budget cycle models is reduced and sometimes even vanishes. Depending on the paper. But if you are interested in that, check for the word term limit and political budget cycles. Then you should get an answer to that. In terms of deforestation cycles, I don't think that it plays a big role, but that is just what I believe, because I think whether it's the term limited government or another government, they still would like to stay in power and pass this on to their party friends if they can. But I mean, I agree. It is possible that the effect is smaller in such term limited periods. So we could probably include it, but I don't think this is the focus for us. This is also one of the things you have to think when you write a paper to have a clear idea on what do we really want, what are the aspects that matter for us. You can include many things. Here we want to capture what are the determining factors that increase or decrease political budget or deforestation. Thanks for the question. Great that you asked it. Anybody else out there, or would you like to follow up? If you're not satisfied with my answer, you can come back. Yeah? That's perfectly fine.
Bisa kita? Langsung? Oh yeah. Because
hold it a second. I'm not sure whether he wants to respond. No? Okay.
Yeah. Do you think is it also possible? Your model also possible to be applied in other commodities rather than forest, such like mining or maybe because deforestation political cycles as already written by you and your friend. I'm thinking about the other commodity maybe in the case of Indonesia, it's like coal or nickel. Do you have any idea that this also probably applies to other commodities rather than forest?
Well,
And also about the last question, it is maybe related to definition of the incumbent. It is about the person or about the parties? Thank you.
yeah, that's a good question. Who is the incumbent? I mean, we're not making it fine-grained that we study who is interacting in a political party and who is doing what and which role they have. We are just looking at there is an election and there is somebody or some party that is in power and they do something. So incumbent you have to take loosely or more generally, meaning those who determine political, who determine policy. To answer that part. The other part is a very good one, the natural resources aspect. Actually, I think this model could be applied one-for-one to any natural resources issue. As long as, I mean, we even have the component now that natural resources are running out eventually, are reduced by what you do in the previous period. But largely they are there. And for a longer period of time, you can use as much as you like. You can exploit as much as you like. The longer term effect that in 20 years we're running out of it, or that the rainforests are gone in 50 years or whatever, that is irrelevant for a government that is focusing on the short. So to answer your question, clearly, yes. For any natural resource problem, this model would be applicable, which actually gives me the idea that we might even want to study this not simply for deforestation, or in a more, possibly in a more general context. You could just look at a resource cycle model, political resource cycle.
I think your paper is a good site into. If I can ask or comment a bit on maybe two issues. The first one is regarding your observation, how many countries involved in the observation, and reflecting to Indonesia's budget cycle, where we have a budget deficit cap of 3%. So I wonder if, I mean, in the expansion of your paper with if it is possible as well, probably it's also good to compare countries with fiscal discipline versus those do not have. How much room that the incumbent have if the country has that kind of budget deficit, budget discipline, sorry. The second one is that using the Paris Agreement of the climate change, for countries that have forests, it's probably more valuable to keep it that way to meet their Paris Agreement commitment of emission. So maybe past when we don't have Paris Agreement, deforestation, yes, increase your revenue so that you can bribe the voters. But because of the Paris Agreement, you don't have that much room with the deforestation because you have other obligation, which is to meet your commitment in the Paris Agreement, and the achievement toward the agreement is as valuable as bribing the so whether it is possible also, I mean, maybe you're interested to see before and after of the Paris Agreement of the flexibility of countries to use deforestation as a instrument to buy voters. Thank you so much and excellent presentation.
Thanks very much. There's two nice ideas. Yeah, the idea of how much room is there for deforestation in a country, and this could indeed be limited by fiscal discipline. So I'm never really sure how relevant fiscal discipline measures really are. In Europe, we have shown that countries can always find a way to get around them. So we have actually, one of the papers I mentioned here was political forecast cycles, which is the idea, well, basically it was motivated by a paper about US states, which have a constitutional balanced budget constraint. So 43 out of the 50 states have such a constraint. And yet, it can be shown that they are not following. And why not? Well, it's very simple. Because you can, and that's what our theoretical model explains, you can have there are political forecast cycles. In an election year, you just have to forecast the development of your economy better than it actually is. That means you can expect higher tax revenue, which you can use to spend. So again, the same idea to give out goodies. After the elections, of course, surprisingly, you find that there was not enough money. Why not? Because the economy wasn't going so well. So your forecasts were wrong, but you just got around your constitutional balanced budget. Your second idea, the Paris Agreement, is also a nice one, which we could put in as a dummy to see if from that moment on the things actually change. And I would like to put it more in also in the context of what said. I think you said it about the media, the media freedom and the boom. You said it also? Okay. So you've got three things that go in the same direction. Namely, does it reduce the room for maneuver for a government? And these are important factors. Thank you. Ahmad.
So yeah, the effect of the deforestation could be different from to the voters. If this election is in the national level, then let's say there is a deforestation in Sumatra, in Kalimantan, me in Java could be okay. We do not have any effect on because of this deforestation. So it will not affect my motivation for the to vote, yeah, given the deforestation that is happening. But it could be more have more impact on the people that live on the area that close to the forest. So I think the effect of this deforestation with election could be differ whether this is in the national level, provincial, or maybe in more local election. Yeah, the more local election, it could be the effect would be bigger. It could be, yeah. And then the people can also, when the deforestation is, let's say we cut the forest and then turn the forest into crop estate, then it could also be have a different effect. Yeah, it could benefit the people in that area because now they can have some jobs, they can have some income from the crop estate. other than the forest. So it could also increase have positive impact on the waters.
I'm not saying
Could
that
be.
deforestation is bad.
Yeah.
although- um, but yeah, this is beyond this model. The idea, or this paper, the idea is how can the government use deforestation for electoral purposes? What you're describing is exactly how a government would use it, and one of the possibilities. You can deforest, create some industries, people get jobs, and the government collects taxes. Yeah? So the government has some additional revenue with some additional positive effects. I mean, maybe I can I can interpret your point a little bit differently. I don't know whether you meant that also. We have in the model this idea that deforestation is negatively perceived by voters, but it could actually be that they positively perceive. So if a significant proportion of the population gains from deforestation, then they would vote in favor for the government. So maybe we should have make this a flexible parameter. We've got a parameter in which the preferences of voters get shifted because of deforestation. But we could also reverse that. We could say it gets shifted the other way. And depending on which way it gets shifted, the effect would be more positive or more negative on preventing deforestation or encouraging it. Thank you. Okay, have we got more questions? Somebody from the off, maybe?
The theory could be different with the fact in the field. With the fact, like deforestation might be good for a group of people because it creates job and creates income and welfare. But if everybody thinks that it's good, then there could be deforestation as the end result. And everybody's then get the bad result from that in the future. Because this is in the public economic called as fallacy of composition. If everybody thinks that it's good, then it becomes bad. So what's important in this research, I think we look at the fact, at the data. It doesn't matter what the politicians said in the campaign. Nowadays, I learned that many politicians use that they are succeeded in reforestation, and they keep the forest in a good condition. But what we see is the fact. What is the fact in the field? What's the data? What the data said about that? Because in a micro level it might be good, but in the macro level, the picture might be different. Thank you.
Thank you. That's something I'll pass on to Emiliano, who's working his PhD thesis on that. Yeah? Okay, any other questions from somewhere out there in the wide world? No, here's another question.
I'm still looking at the first equation, which put the deforestation as the dependent variable. And the impact of, yes, empirical equation, the impact of democracy and fiscal deficits. The 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 results as far as soon as shows that there is a trade-off. If the fiscal deficit increase, so the deforestation will increase. And I think we need to dive more deeper about the characteristic of the fiscal deficit. What are the characteristic of the fiscal deficit for some countries? For example, if the deficit that came from, for example, or came from non-urgent projects or programs, will it be resulted higher degree of deforestation? Same thing, similar question for the democracy. What is the characteristic of democracy we are talking about? Because it seems either countries with good degree of democracy, democracy or democracy would still result higher degree of deforestation. Same thing with monarchy countries or communist party with just, yes, authoritarian countries, just like, for example, China, but also raising question for monarchy countries just like Thailand, but their devastation is not bad as Indonesia. So same thing about similar things. What kind of budget deficit with what kind of democracy?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we definitely have to look at the democracy aspect. This is not clear as it is at the moment. The other aspect on what is deficit, yeah, that's an interesting question. There have been dozens of empirical papers on different types of deficit, different types of spending, different type of revenues that are used during political budget cycles. So the spending shifts to the more visible spending components, for instance. That's not our focus. We're not looking at that. Interesting issue, but it has been discussed a lot. So we want to keep it as simple as possible and focus on these aspects, deforestation versus deficit. But then the aspects that affect it, we have to understand more closely: education, democracy. Why does it show the sign that it does here? Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, I think we've come to a conclusion here, and I'll pass back to our chairperson. Thank you very much for listening and for the many questions. That was great, really good. Thank you.
Okay, to closing this session, I will first thank you for every participant that has joined or participated to our intriguing discussion today. But I think first of all, I have to say that if we want to, like in the election years, if we want to elect for something, some party or else, we have to think that how their rent seeking goes through. Like I mean, we can see as the result for the research that democracy is positive through the deforestation. So we have to think that too, not only for the economics but also for the environmental, but in the environmental thing. So I think that's all for this for today's public class. Thank you for all the participants and good afternoon.